cheap versus expensive hammers. We've bought the cheapest hammer on Amazon and the most expensive hammer on Amazon to compare the two so you don't have to. So make sure you like and subscribe, because in this video we're going to put these hammers to the test and find out whether it's really worth paying £50 for a hammer or not. Make sure you like and subscribe, and let's get into it. So in terms of hammers, it's a tool that we use a lot as an electrician. What do you use it for? Well, hammering stuff, smashing things to pieces, pulling stuff out of the walls. Now, obviously we don't use hammers that much to put in nails because we're not carpenters, but we do use hammers a lot to clip cables and to unclip things, pull things off, stuff like that. So a hammer is, let's face it, a fundamental part of an electrician's toolbox. But you might be watching this and you're not an electrician, you might be a different trade, and you might want to know whether it's worth paying 50 quid for a hammer or not. So we're going to show you. This is the Amtech hammer from Amazon. It cost £4. Then in the middle here, we've got the Max Power tubular steel hammer with rubber grip, £7.69. And then here we have the Rolls-Royce of electricians hammers from Hulterforce. This was nearly £50, a whopping £49 for a hammer. You might think that's just extortion. Now, as always, packaging is something that is my bugbear. Why wrap something in a bit of single-use plastic? It does annoy me, and what I've seen in general in these comparison videos is that the more money you pay for a tool, the less packaging it has, which is kind of ironic really, isn't it? This one, it's got lots of cheap rubbishy packaging. This one is in a box, which is at least better than single-use plastic. Oh yeah. But then they've put a nice, yeah, you know, they really needed to protect this hammer by wrapping it in a little bit of bubble wrap. What a complete joke. I'll give you my initial thoughts and then we'll put these hammers to the test. And at the end of the video, we're going to throw in a little wild card because I've got this. And the question is, why is this cheaper than this? Make sure you watch till the end to find out. So this is the cheapest. Here is a mid-range but still pretty cheap hammer, and this one is eye-wateringly expensive. So what's the difference? Well, let's check the weight first of all. This is fairly light. Now I believe it has a hollow steel handle. Fairly light. It's got a very cheap solid plastic handle, and it says Amtech on it. Now I'm pretty sure Amtech, wasn't that some kind of like pyramid scheme in the USA or something? I can't remember. This one is also very plasticky. The head is slightly different. The claw is slightly at more of an angle, and obviously the whole shaft is covered in plastic. However, it is pretty solid plastic here, and then this bit is a little bit rubbery. Definitely feels nicer than this one. And in terms of the weight, they're very similar. Then we come to this one. Now, this, I believe, is solid all the way down. It's got a nice rubberized handle with the Hulterforce on it. This bit at the bottom is solid plastics, it's quite hard. And then here at the top, what you'll see that's quite different to the others is you've got the claws, which are very much quite flat, a bit like sort of a pickaxe angle, versus the claws on these ones, which are obviously a lot more curved. And there's a reason for that, which I'll explain to you shortly. Now, the other interesting thing about this is the square top. It's not completely round like these other hammers, but it's got a square bit at the top. And unlike these two hammers, this is called the Electricians hammer. Now, there's a reason for that, and I'll explain it. And I'll be really interested to hear your comments as to whether you think it's really worth having these subtle differences and calling it an electrician's hammer or not. What do you do as an electrician with a hammer? Well, often you clip cables, right? So we've got a bit of wood here and we've got some cable clips. An assortment of cable clips from Amazon, and as always there will be Amazon links in the description of this video where you can buy the products that we show, whether you prefer the cheap ones or the expensive ones. All the links are below. So let's take our cheap hammer first and let's put it to the test. We're going to use a round, large cable clip to start with. Going to try it with each of these three and just see what the difference is. So cheap hammer first. Okay. Then our medium range hammer. Then our expensive hammer. Okay, initial thoughts are there was barely any difference between the three. I'd say that this one is a little bit heavier on the head, so it has a bit more weight to it. Maybe hammers in a little bit quicker, but actually I think in terms of the head weight they're all pretty much the same. What does it say? 8 ounce. So this is an 8 ounce. I believe this is also an 8 ounce. They're probably all the same. Oh, this might be a 10 ounce actually, which is slightly heavier. So that's with our big clips, but what about the little fiddly clips? You know, the really tiny fiddly clips like this, that you inevitably end up hammering your finger and causing yourself a blood blister. Let's try. Does the job. Also does the job. Again, basically for me there's no difference between the three of those in terms of actually hammering in a clip. Now, how about hammering in nails? I did say that we don't do this much as electricians, but you might be watching and you're not an electrician. Let's try hammering in 3 big nails and 3 small nails and see how that goes. Okay, that was interesting because this one was fine. This one felt a little bit shonky when it came to hammering that nail, and this one actually felt the best on those. I'm going to turn to the side and just try some small nails. Okay, so that went in really easy. Again, this one didn't feel quite as good. That was fine, but to be honest, barely any difference when it comes to hammering those in. Now I'm going to put one more in here and we're going to do a little bit of a test as to actually pulling a nail out. It's funny, as electricians, we probably spend as much time pulling nails out than we do hammering them in, especially cable clips, you know, removing old cables from buildings and stuff. So what I want to know is, are there any advantages from cheap to expensive when it comes to actually pulling clips or nails out? So let's try the cheapest one first. We'll try and get onto this. A little bit of leverage. Okay, that comes out really easily. This one, a little bit harder to get the fork in there because actually the fork is slightly wider on this one, I believe. And then this one, very easy to get the fork in, comes out nicely. Let's try the cheap one with the small clips. Yeah, okay, now that is going to be tricky. I basically can't get onto that at all. This one I think might work better, and I'll tell you why in a second. Yeah, that one comes out fine. Okay. And then the expensive hammer comes out really well. Yeah, okay, interesting. So, one thing that is quite a big difference between these two hammers is this. Can you see there, you've got quite a wide gap and it's quite rounded. This one, however, it goes a lot narrower and it's kind of sharper, so it's easier to grip onto small things, whereas this, you're not going to be able to grip onto anything unless it's quite chunky. This one is probably even more precise and sharp than that one, so there's definitely an improvement in quality there between the three of them. Now, how about removing large nails? Okay, that does the job fine. Also fine. Also fine. Interesting. And now removing a small nail. Okay, so that did work. We'll try again with the medium hammer. Works fine. And with the posh hammer, yeah, really nice. Okay, so if we hammer a small clip back in here, let me demonstrate to you something which makes this electrician's hammer slightly advantageous. Can you see how the angle is quite different on these? So that is quite a steep angle, whereas this is a shallow angle. Now, for removing clips and things that are quite close to the wall, it makes it a lot easier to get in without having the angle of the handle. You see the difference? So the angle of the handle there is not very steep, whereas to get this one over it, you're going to have quite a steep angle. Now imagine that you are working in a corner. This hammer, you can get in there quite easily and pull that clip out, no problem. However, try that with the normal claw hammer and you might have a bit of a problem. See that? So this is the wall, I can't get in there, the angle needs to be too steep, so I'm never going to be able to get that out. So if I'm pulling this out of a wall or a corner of a room or against a ceiling, there's no way that I'm going to be able to get that clip out. So that is one reason why this hammer has been designed differently for electricians, is to enable you to remove clips in certain situations. Now there's another place that this comes into play, is when hammering clips in at a corner as well. So see this scenario here. Again, you're in a corner, right? And you want to hammer in a clip. Because of the flat top here, you can hammer in right next to the ceiling without any issues. Whereas with this, it's not going to be quite as easy. So it's a subtle difference, one that you might not notice unless you really think about it, but it's a clear design advantage with this electrician's hammer that makes it easier to hammer in and remove stuff when it's in tight corners. Now there is another advantage to this, which I'll show you. This plastic bottom here is designed to actually bash stuff into the wall. So imagine you drill a hole, you pop a raw plug into the wall, you can bash the raw plug in like that. This is solid plastic designed to be able to knock stuff in that's plastic without shattering it to pieces. So it's quite a nice little design piece on that as well, which again is quite useful. But the question is it really worth paying all that money extra just for those subtle differences? How often do you use a hammer? I know for me, it's not something that comes out that often. Now maybe you're an electrician that's doing new builds and you're using a hammer a lot, in which case it'll come into play more. But it might be that your hammer doesn't get taken out of the bag very often, in which case it might not be worth spending 50 quid to buy a hammer. But I said to you earlier on in the video that there's a wild card. And it's a really interesting wild card. It is this, right? Notice any similarities? This is the Wihar electrician's hammer, and this is the Hultafors electrician's hammer. And for all intents and purposes, they are exactly the same hammer. They're just branded differently. However, the Hultafors costs 50 quid. This one costs about 30 quid. So there's a 20 quid price premium just to get the Hultafors one. And actually, the rebranded version from Wihar is exactly the same, as far as I can see. And yet, it's a lot cheaper. Now you might think, well, I love the black handle, it looks pretty slick, you know, or you might prefer the red, like the Ferrari of the hammer world, and think, well, you know, I'd rather get the red one and it's cheaper as well. I'll leave that to you to decide. But it's interesting to know that these two hammers are basically identical, and yet one is a lot cheaper than the other. Now, I will leave links to both of these in Amazon so you can compare. As you can see with this one, this is used, this is well used, and that's because I have been using this for several years, and I do love this hammer. Although I said that I don't really use a hammer very much, it does come in handy quite a lot, particularly for bashing in raw plugs like this and removing clips. So personally, I would go with the premium end of the hammer world rather than these cheap and cheerful versions. Now you might be a bit more of an old school person and like a wooden handled hammer, for example. So let me know all of your hammery goodness in the comments below. But for me, I would recommend the Electrician's hammer. However, whether it's worth spending an extra 15, 20 quid for the Hultafors one versus the Weha one, I'll leave that down to you to decide. But I hope you've enjoyed this cheap versus expensive tools comparison video. We have a whole playlist with these comparisons. So if you've enjoyed this, why not stay and watch a couple more? There'll be links up here. And if you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell, then you'll get regular updates from us when we post every 2 weeks a new Tools to Sparks video about the tools that we love. But either way, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.